they give to the community as a whole. It would be a futile exercise and a waste of time, in my estimation, to do so. To me, I think the general perception into this, if people don't like the idea of it, we're not going to convince them otherwise. But I truly believe the vast majority of the community is not concerned about it. It's not high on their priority list, and I think we'd hear more if we stopped the practice and the cost had to be borne by the individual parishioners within each one of those communities. And then we're going to start getting trade-offs again as far as what they can provide for services, free services, and amenities for the community as a whole. So to me, I don't want to go through the exercise. I don't want to see a line item in the budget. The fact is, we do provide the service. I think it's a useful service for the community as a whole in order to get to their places of worship, and also to allow public access to those buildings which they so graciously offer so many community groups. So I don't think there's a place for it in the line item in the budget, and I don't think we could ever quantify it, truly. But I truly believe that for what we offer them, the services we get in return as a community, as a whole, far outweighs it. And that's why it's not an issue with me. So, but no anger here. I understand it. I understand the arguments. I understand the thought processes. Yours, which is totally different than, I think you're being misunderstood to a great extent, but also there is a certain segment of the community that doesn't want to do it at all. So,
Steve, I respect your input. I respect your approach. I think that we can all have differences of opinion. We can all share them. We can speak. We can articulate as best as we can. But I don't think we should be insulting or condescending. I think that's a point of order. Okay, and I think people watching on TV, I think it's a little embarrassing, to be quite frank with you. You can be upset with me and you can express in strong terms, but you don't need to yell or get condescending.
Not embarrassed out of anything I said. I don't regret it.
It's the action.
I don't take it back. I'll repeat it again. I think we can move on, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have the Board of Health here.
thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate it.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I'm Gary Hunt. I'm the chairman of the North Reading Board of Health, and I just have some handouts here. I didn't get this over the weekend. That's the regulations that we're going to before you with. It's hard copies of the presentation, and this is just some backup information that defines some of the terms. One of the tables.
I took what you had emailed me, and it was distributed to the board on their iPads.
Right. This is just probably a better copy of that file, because sometimes when you scan files and send them, they don't reproduce well. First of all, I want to thank the board for this opportunity to present here this evening. I'd like to introduce the other members of the board, Mike Rickey, Pam Bath, the town's health agent behind me, Martin Fair. We're here, we've titled this an information exchange or information forum to present some additional information to the board in response to a memorandum that was issued to Martin last month, reducing his hours as the health agent. And we're hoping that this information would be useful to the board in perhaps reconsidering that decision to reduce hours. Just going to go over these quickly. The Board of Health, which is the 3 appointed members here, and their agent are responsible for enforcing a whole host of regulations. State of Massachusetts, or the Code of the Massachusetts regulations. Federal regulations, which the state may not necessarily cover, and then local town North Reading regulations. We write a number of regulations to deal with things at the local level: tanning parlors, tanning salons, tattoos, all sorts of things. And that's a copy right there of those regulations. And like I said, we're not going to go through those. They're quite voluminous. Since the board is voluntary, as many boards in town are, we have the authority to essentially enlist the services of an agent. Martin Fair has been the board's and the town's agent for the 25 years I've been on the board, probably longer. I don't know how much longer, Martin, 27, 28? 30 years. So I arrived in '86 and Martin was here. And under the Mass General laws, we have the authority to hire agents as we deem necessary to execute the health, the laws, and its regulations, essentially that code that you have before you. Some of the general responsibilities of the health agent are, and these are not in order of priority, is a compliance officer to enforce code, He's an inspector, an auditor. For example, if somebody wants to open a restaurant in town and they come in with some plans, they'll run them by Martin before they build the restaurant and get permits and basically say, you know, are these going to be consistent with code? So that's kind of an audit function. Trainer and educator, he does training for food service regulations, training for installers, and that's all in the work activity summary that we'll get to in a minute. He's the town's technical expert on health issues and environmental issues. He's the town's representative when there are legal matters that go to court. In fact, Martin got a request today to provide some files to someone in a legal proceeding against the town. So these are not things that we anticipate, nor do we embrace or savor, but you have to deal with the law and deal with court deadlines and so forth. He's an emergency responder. In a way, although not as significant as fire and police. There have been times when Martin and I have been called in the middle of the night to respond to things. Fires at the old age home, a fire in the Big Dog when it was there, because it involves health and the environment of the town and its people. And in short, he's kind of an insurance policy for the health and the environment. If we don't have a Board of Health, if we don't have a health agent, then we're opening ourselves up to potential liabilities issues, litigation issues. One of the things that the board asked Martin to do when we were first alerted to this reduction in hours was to take a look at what do you do? What do you do? He doesn't do these by project by day, but basically Martin went back over the last 3 years and looked at the types of things that he is responsible for or does, the number of those in a given year on average, the amount of time per event, and then to come up with a subtotal. And again, these are all approximations in many cases based upon his own experience, in this case 30 years of experience with the town. As you can see, it's a fairly lengthy list of things. A lot of these things are on an as-needed basis, like having to provide files for an ongoing litigation that we were not aware of. I mean, that can take a lot of time without, and I do a lot of that in my own work. I've been an environmental consultant for over 35 years, and when I get a request from a lawyer, from a court, there's a deadline there. You've got to respond. You don't want a subpoena that says, I need you to appear in court now because of your lack of response. So he sees those sorts of things. He oversees all of the work that's done by others, the people that we hire, the contractors that do restaurant inspections. We're all very proud of the fact that we do inspect our restaurants twice a year. Many towns don't. And I think that we're very strict adherence to the code, try to maintain compliance with everything in town, both health and the environment, and we try to do that in a diligent fashion. As you can see, we're looking at, if you look at the sum here, which is, 2147 of the 3 years, you're pretty much close to a full-time position on an ongoing basis, at least the last 3 years. There are times when we've had to hire support from Martin back in the development boom, as you all recall, back in the 80s, early 90s, mid-90s, when there was a lot of housing developments and there were plans piled high on his desk in there. We had to hire people to help him go through those plans. Because as you can see, reviewing one of these plans can be quite time-consuming. Relative to revenue issues, this is just some data for you to consider. The Board of Health does collect a significant amount of money through permits and fees on an annual basis. The last 2 years, 2 full fiscal years, not this year because we don't have a full year of data, it's about $37,000. And we just actually are, at the last meeting earlier this month, we voted to raise some of those fees. So those numbers actually for the next year and moving out will be even higher. The interesting thing about FY 2011, which we're currently in, I think it's this FY 2011, we're going to realize in excess of $85,000 because there was a $48,000 sum which has been restored to the general fund for the flu vaccination reimbursement program, and that was an initiative that Martin took on during the past year, not this current year, but in the past year. So those monies are actually arriving as we speak into the general fund. So there's an ability to get additional revenue on an opportunistic basis. And in this particular case, it was reimbursements to the town from Medicare, Medicaid, and the private insurers. And the next present slide goes into the influenza immunization reimbursement program. As I said, $48,000 to date has been transferred to the town's general fund. It was a fairly rigorous application process For those of you that have dealt personally or professionally with insurance companies, they're not the easiest group of people to deal with. You have to provide a lot of information. And he was able to get North Reading as a roster biller with Medicare, Medicare Advantage, and a number of private insurers. And this involved distributing forms, completing and reviewing these at the actual clinics when the shots were administered. And this is termed a special project. Impacts on the reduction, as I said, this happened last month, so Martin has curtailed his hours back to, what, 24 hours a week? 23 hours a week from what was 35. So this has had an impact on a number of services because of the fact that it wasn't, taken into account at the beginning of the fiscal year. The hours per week have been reduced about 33% from what they were. Reduction in services, reduced compliance, code enforcement, revenue potential generation by the health department for special projects like the flu vaccination reimbursement. All those things potentially are affected. And in the big picture, it's a potential liability for the town. If we're not able to maintain compliance with health and environment codes and regulations, there is a potential there. And the last item is, tonight, we're hoping, and obviously we're going to be taking questions in a moment or so here, but we'd ask that the board give us some idea of when they might make a decision on this, yay or nay, yes or no. One of the questions we do have to help deal with communications with the board in the future is, normally committees in town, boards have liaisons. We really don't know who that is, who the liaison was. Bob Macheri was the liaison of the Wastewater Planning Advisory Committee. I'm not sure who that is. And if that individual was more actively involved in the board's activities, we might not be here tonight. And the last thing is, relative to the next year's budget, what's the format going to be and schedule so that we can present the information you need in a timely manner well in advance of the budget being put in place. And that's all that I have in a formal presentation. So we'll obviously take questions.
Anyone want to start? Go ahead.
Gary, you're showing revenue here for restaurant and food service in FY10, $16,050. But what are you spending for the third-party vendors who are actually doing that particular work?
Yeah, it's about between 9 and 10, Sean. And that's first round inspections. The way the process works is if somebody has some violations that requires us to go back, there's an incremental cost on top of that.
And who goes back? Is it?
No, it'll
Or is it the vendor that?
be the vendor. Martin oversees everything that they do, reviews their reports. If there are serious violations, that need to be remedied, he'll bring them to the board. We've brought people in for what we call woodshed meetings where, you've got a couple of serious violations here. You can either fix this or get a closed by order of Board of Health sign on your door, which you don't really want if you're a restaurant. That not good for business. So there's a possibility, if everybody's in compliance, ironically, the figure is low. If people are not in compliance and we have to go back again and again, then the fee that they're charged goes up. So you want the number to be low. That means everybody's adhering to the law.
You say they're inspected twice a year, so is it 9 to 10,000 each inspection?
No.
Or-
That's
the
Go
total.
ahead, Mark.
Point of clarification, that gets us a minimum of 2 routine inspections on restaurants and re-inspections if there are critical violations, and more often than not, there are. High-risk operations, we would probably inspect 3 times a year. Other restaurants twice. Things that are limited retail operations, like a CVS that has a couple of food aisles, something like that, we would probably only inspect once a year. It's probably about 200 hours worth of work that they do.
To answer your question regarding liaison, who's the liaison, there isn't any. That's something we can fix, but I just pulled up the list, and we do not have a liaison to the Board
That's
of Health.
because it's appointed by the town administrator. Like, we don't have a liaison to recreation.
That's
No,
true.
So the only liaisons we generally have are to board-appointed boards, committees, and commissions. Anybody that comes under the purview of an appointment of the town administrator